All right. It is just about noon here and 6 p.m. Central Europe time and 9 a.m. Eastern. We've got our last hour block of the day. Coming up first will be Scott Ford, the founder of Corgibytes, to talk with us about code for the new environment of remote operations. And it's really exciting to get to talk with him. And then, after about 15 minutes or so, we'll switch over to Shrav and SOC 2 certification and automating collecting audit evidence. So, Scott, it's been a pleasure to work with you over the years. We have a client in common, and it's always great to work with your team. So I'm really excited to hear what you have to say about code for this new era. So I will turn it over to you.
Awesome. Thanks, Tom. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And is that coming through okay? Awesome.
Good to go.
All right. Thanks, everyone, for having me. Okay. Thanks, everyone, for having me. So one of the things that I think is really interesting in this, this new normal that we find ourselves in with COVID-19 is that maintenance has become a much bigger issue. And it's something that a lot of us are much more aware of, as a lot of IT systems have, really struggled under the strain that they're seeing. And there's been a lot of issues with deferred maintenance, kind of rearing its head, the consequences of that rearing its head. So what I'd like to talk about today is, how to find talent and how to find the right people to do that repair work that's going to be needed to keep these systems going in the future. So hi, I'm Scott, like Tom mentioned, and my biggest passion in the world is fixing bugs. I absolutely love to fix bugs, but there's a problem. Like early in my career, the only time I would get to fix bugs was when I was new to a project. And that was seen as a learning activity. I would be allowed to dive into the system and learn the ins and outs of the system by fixing bugs on it. And then one day I would be told by my boss that I needed to stop fixing bugs and working on features. And this idea that features were more important. Like every single boss that I had, really drilled this message into me that, my best use was to build new features, and that the features were more important than the bugs. But over the years, I really started to dig into that and really think about well, are they? Are features really more important than bugs? And when we think about a feature versus a bug fix, what's the motivation behind why it changes? What's the motivation behind each of those requests? In each case, the system isn't doing something that the user needs. In the case of a feature, there's an additional capability that a user needs that the system isn't providing. And in the case of a bug, there is a capability, but it's not working quite the way that a user is expecting it to. And so a feature is a modification of the system that corrects a misconception about how it's supposed to work. And a bug fixes something about the system that fixes a misconception about how it works. And so it's also worth considering the negative consequences that can come from continually putting off, bug fixes. And there's a whole list of issues and problems we can find ourselves running into, starting with, I'll upgrade it later, to, now things are crashing, to, data is getting lost and users are getting frustrated, and it can domino and snowball to ultimately you've got bad press and you've lost market share. And that's really why it's important to consider that, fixing bugs is really good for business. Your features, the primary purpose of adding them is to attract new customers. You're adding capabilities to the system that are going to attract the next customer for your application. Whereas bug fixes, they're they're very important for retaining the customers that you already have. And as many people who've gone through any kind of education into business management, it's the common conception is that it's much cheaper to retain your customers than it is to find new ones. The marketing costs that are involved in acquiring new customers is much higher. So having a business engine and an IT maintenance engine that is really focused on attracting new people and serving new people while ignoring the existing capabilities can start to can start to cause harm. But there's another problem, and that's that our society treats maintenance work as boring. We have a really big bias in our world towards innovation. There's this idea that innovation is more exciting and is more enjoyable. And you can survey a bunch of software developers, and you'll probably find out that the vast majority of them would much rather be working on brand new projects than on keeping older ones alive. And that bias shows up in lots of places. One example is in the kind of the maker movement, around Make Magazine and MakerCon and tables like this at Barnes & Noble, where my business partner Andrea posed for this picture. And she's a maker. She's someone who really identifies with this, and so she was really excited to be able to post for this picture. But when we got home, I started thinking about where's my table? I enjoy fixing things. I enjoy the art of repairing things. Where's the table that serves me and the people who are like me? So that really got Andre and I thinking, and we started to think about how healthy software projects really need more than one kind of developer. And so we did a lot of brainstorming for figuring out what would we call the opposite of a maker? And we batted a lot of ideas around, and we ended up settling on mender. And so this idea that a maker is someone who makes things and a mender is someone who repairs things. But then that didn't quite segment people, entirely in the way that we wanted to. So we also thought about there's another continuum in terms of speed versus quality. And on the speed end, you have the hacker, and on the quality end, you have the crafter. And then we can think about the different combinations of what these quadrants look like. In the top right, a maker crafter is somebody who's really good at building features. And this is where a lot of hiring bias in IT takes place. And then you have a maker hacker who's really good at rapid prototyping. This is probably the second most desired hiring category that I see. And then down in the hacker mender category, you've got emergency responders like site reliability engineers, things of that sort, people who are really good at coming in a hurry and fixing things quickly. And then there's the quadrant where I feel most comfortable, the projects that I really enjoy working on, where what's needed is mender energy with an eye towards craft and making sure that the solution that's being put in place is something that's going to last. And so we can dig in at these quadrants and kind of look at the different characteristics of a project to help you identify, does your project need, that kind of person? And so we can walk through the quadrants and think about the different traits of a project and the traits of the people who would best serve, a project that needs that energy. So in the rapid prototyper, new concepts, lots of unknowns, that's when you're going to derive the best benefit from having a rapid prototyper on your team. So looking for people who have a just ship it mentality, and they're really good at, crafting things together really quickly and throwing them together like that. Whereas on the feature builder side, if you've already got yourself in an established market and your business goals are primarily to attain new users in a very measurable way, and you have got pretty good on pretty well-defined problem space, and stability and quality of the work product really matters a lot, then feature builders are what you need. So finding people who are really passionate about their craft and really enjoy adding new capabilities, those are the kinds of people that you're going to want on your project. And then down in the emergency responder category, your project really needs this people if you're experiencing frequent outages and lots of site crashes, lots of emergencies that people need to respond to. And the traits that you need for this category, for application finds itself kind of stuck here, is people who are very adaptable and thrive under pressure and are willing to defer the root cause analysis until later. And they're willing to put the Band-Aid on it and get the problem fixed, and then the root cause can be discovered later. And I feel like that's where the software remodelers come into play, is they can take that Band-Aid and they can make it a more permanent long-term solution and actually discover the root cause of that problem and remediate the issue. And so if you find yourself with a legacy system with, unaddressed vulnerabilities and, it's mired in technical debt, and, it's very difficult to make changes to it, then having people who are, willing and able to make the system better bit by bit, those are the people that you need. I get asked a lot how to find people like that. Like, where do these people hang out? So one place is a community that that Andre and I have founded called Legacy Code Rocks. It's been running for about 5 years. We just ran a virtual conference called MentorCon, focused around the idea of legacy code. So that's a place to go find other mentors. There's also the Software Crafters organization. There are many people who hang out there who also like software remodeling work. Maintainerati is an organization that focuses on open source maintenance. And you'll find people definitely on the mentor end of the spectrum who are really passionate about open source. And then there's the maintainers organization, which really looks at maintenance work across our society, and the devaluing of maintenance that exists in our cities' infrastructures and every aspect of our society. So those are great places to go look and try to find people who like mending, and then that way you can match up the energy that's needed on your project with the people who are genuinely passionate about doing it. So wanted to say thank you for having me. I think it's very interesting to have this conversation within the context of thinking about a post-COVID world and how this experience might teach us improvements we might want to make to IT infrastructure in the future. And if anybody wants to get in touch, you can reach me here, and I'll be dropping my my slides in Slack later. And then I've tried to leave some time for questions if anybody's interested.
Thank you, Scott, so much for joining us today. I love that matrix, the matrix of menders and hackers, rapid prototypers, and that really fits the IT marketplace just as well. And it's really, really fascinating to see people just, because there are those emergency responder admins who are just there. I'm just trying to keep the lights on. I'm trying to keep the fires out, versus, hey, I'm building out a new IT infrastructure. I feel like the consultant model tends to be more towards that upper right-hand quadrant, as opposed to, a lot of in-house IT departments are below that line. They're there to, maintain the status quo and build those kind of things. So it absolutely struck a chord with me. That was just what I was thinking about. So do we have any open questions? I know that there was a request for a copy of those slides in the Q&A there. So if you drop those in your channel, you can also find Scott in his channel, Ask-Scott, on the Futureproof IT 2020 Slack. But we'll hold the window open for another 30 seconds and see if there are some questions in there. All right, I think we are going to move right along. Scott, thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Thanks.
Oh, there was one. There was another question from an attendee. Do you have any tips on interviewing to build a team with this in mind?
Yeah, so one of the things I like to look for is adaptability and willingness to learn new things, because that's something that I find is a really recurrent theme when working on projects like this. We'll often get asked to work in an environment where no one else can be found who's willing to work on it, or knowledge and information about how to work with that system has just been completely lost. So people who are willing to kind of really dig in and do the archaeological work, so ways to interview for that on the developer side. One of the things that we like to do in the technical interview is we'll do a screen pairing session, but the first half of the screen pairing session is in a language of that person's choice. And then the second half, we pick a language. And we try to pick something that we think they've never used before. So then we get to see, like, how do they set up a development environment? How do they go learn the syntax? How do they translate their current knowledge to, solve the problem? And that really helps us learn, like, how adaptable is this person going to be when they're dropped into a completely strange environment. So.
Awesome. Well, Scott, thank you so much for joining us this morning, or this afternoon, this evening, whichever time zone we're in. And folks can find you in the Ask-Scott channel or at Corgibytes.com. And yeah, thanks so much.
Thanks, Tom. I appreciate it.
Coming up next, we have Shrav Mehta from Secureframe talking about SOC 2 certification and automating the collecting of audit evidence. And he'll be joining us in just a moment. Shrav, thank you so much for jumping between sessions. I know we put you a little bit on the spot yesterday to put you in the security panel, but really was great to have your expertise there. So Shrav, take it away.
Cool. Of course, happy to help as always. Cool. I'm going to share my screen real quick. Cool. Awesome. If you have any questions during the talk, please, feel free to put them. You could just put them right into the Q&A section in Zoom near the settings at the bottom. Feel free to put them throughout. And if it makes sense, I'll try to answer them live or, answer them at the end. Cool. So, this talk is just on how to get started with SOC 2. So just for a little bit of background, Secureframe helps people get SOC 2 and ISO 27001 certifications. We have a lot of experience doing this. And, what we want to do is help people out, get started with a strong foundational base layer with, their SOC 2 process. Cool. So, what exactly is SOC 2? So this is some dictionary definition I found online. SOC 2 is a report on an organization's controls relevant to security, availability, processing integrity, confidentiality, and privacy, and the effectiveness of those controls. And a SOC 2 audit is an auditor's opinion on how your organization's security controls meet the SOC 2 requirements. Okay, what does that even mean? Here's the quick slim down definition that I try to give to people to just make things super simple. SOC 2 is a compliance framework, and to meet the SOC 2 requirements, an organization will have to implement a huge list of security controls and collect evidence they've been implemented. Many of these items are operational, like having employees go through security awareness training, maintaining an org chart, having employees complete background checks. And many of these items are technical, like having vulnerability scans on your servers, encrypting your S3 buckets, backing up your database. Once you provision your environment to be compliant, an auditor takes a look at your implementation and the evidence that you've collected showing that you made this implementation. They ask you some questions about it and they hand you a SOC 2 report. You are good to go. So that's the very quick definition of really what SOC 2 is. It's just a list of things that you have to do in order to secure and protect your business. Now, the primary use cases for having a SOC 2 are really to show the security of your business to potential customers. SOC 2, ISO 27001, it's really about sales. It's a good starting point for security, but I think many would agree in the space that SOC 2 does not mean that you have amazing security. It's just a starting point and it's a way for you to show your customers that you're secure. It's a report, and that's really all it is. So going into that, there's actually like two types of SOC 2. There's a SOC 2 type 1, which has an audit period of 1 day. And essentially, the auditor is assessing the design of your security processes at a specific point in time. So it's a static check, just over, 1 point in time. And then you have your SOC 2 type 2. Which has a minimum audit period recommended by the AICPA of 6 months. And usually you get your first audit or your first SOC 2 type 2 audit after 6 months. And from there on out, you get an audit done annually. And here the auditor is trying to assess the effectiveness of your security processes by observing your operations over a period of time instead of just a single point in time. And that's the key difference. When you're talking to customers, what they really want to see is a SOC 2 type 2. A type 1 is progress, but really what matters is getting the SOC 2 type 2. They want to make sure that you're continuously, following these security practices, not just doing it once, producing the report, and not really continuing on from there. So, as you're thinking about this, keep in mind, the differences between a type 1 and a type 2 report. Now, there's also two other, relevant, frameworks. There's the SOC 1, which is it's really about your financial controls. It's very different from a SOC 2, which is, about IT and security. It just happens to be audited by CPAs. Then there's also a SOC 3. Now, for most organizations, this isn't going to be relevant. SOC 3 is just a slimmed down SOC 2 report that people use for like marketing materials or sales purposes. So, with the SOC 2 report, most companies only give this out under NDA. But, with a SOC 3, you can post that publicly. So oftentimes, if you go to AWS or Google Cloud, you'll see their SOC 3 report. But, you can access their SOC 2 report if you sign an NDA or an agreement with AWS or Google Cloud or really any organization that has one, to see the full comprehensive report of an organization's security practices. So that's really just a very quick overview of the different types of SOC. You don't want to confuse a SOC 2 type 1 with a SOC 1, completely different things. Cool. So, the first thing that, companies can do to get started with SOC 2 is, go through a pen test. So, a pen test on average will take about 2 to 4 weeks to complete. There's a lot of different companies and services that offer pen tests. The two I see, used most frequently are Cobalt and HackerOne. Both are really reputable pen testing services that are easy to schedule with, cost effective, and again, reputable. There's a lot of other pen test providers, but you really want to make sure you pick one that's reputable, that's known for finding these vulnerabilities and attacks. So one of the first things you could do for getting a SOC 2 is get that pen test, resolve any high or severe vulnerabilities that are found. A pen test is really needed for your SOC 2 type 2. You don't need one for your type 1, but again, the type 2 is really what all your customers are going to care about. So if you're trying to finish your SOC 2 as quickly as possible, get the pen test started first, because it does take at least 2 to 4 weeks to complete, potentially longer. So if you get that started at the same time, you'll be able to get things done a lot quicker. What a lot of the questions I get asked is like, what is a pen tester really looking for? There's a lot of common things. Usually they're looking for like, injection attacks that, allow an attacker to insert or pass malicious code. The most common ones that you might hear about are like SQL injections. They're looking for broken authentication, broken OAuth. Attackers use weak authentication and session management to sometimes impersonate users. So oftentimes pen testers will go through that and make sure that, there's no severe vulnerabilities in that, area. They also look at like sensitive data exposure, XML attacks, broken access control, and a number of other things. Some pen testers even specialize in things like OAuth and very specific cases. Really, most pen testers will cover the same stuff. It's important that they cover the whole scope of your application. So make sure to have those conversations with them up front. One of the next things that, organizations can do is implement single sign-on. I've talked to like many CISOs, many IT managers, and it's crazy, how many organizations don't have a single sign-on service implemented. So, it's super easy to set up. I recommend, companies use Okta or Duo Security. They're both very feature rich. Both these applications do cost a bit of money. Okta has a $1,500 annual contract minimum. So, for smaller IT organizations or smaller organizations in general, what I recommend using is Google Cloud Identity. They have a very comparable offering. It's definitely not as feature rich as Okta, but it's free. If you're already using G Suite, you can enable it in your Google admin panel. It's a great way to just get started very quickly because everyone's, already going to be using G Suite if that's what your organization's on, and it's much easier to roll out. And the action items here to bring these things to like SOC 2 compliance, complacency is to link any supported third-party services that you're using to your SSO provider, disable any non-SSO logins on all these applications, and require two-factor auth for using Okta or using Google Cloud Identity. That's really, really important. So, talk to many organizations that haven't done this, just roll it out super quickly. With Google Cloud Identity being so cheap, there's no reason not to. Cool. So password management, use a password manager. 1Password is, personally my favorite password management system. It's one of the best I've come across. They support shared folders, two-factor authentication. They automatically detect weak or reused passwords across your organization. And it works with most devices and platforms. And 1Password, right now, they actually have a 6-month discount for businesses. You can basically sign up on their site and your whole organization gets it free for 6 months. So there's really no reason not to set it up. 1Password also detects, if a service offers two-factor auth, they will tell you, hey, you can enable it, put in your, two-factor authentication secret in 1Password or store it on your phone or whatever makes the most sense. And the quick action items here to bring this to be SOC 2 compliant are require two-factor auth for all third-party services. And really, if a service offers SSO, you should be enabling it there. But obviously, not all companies offer SSO, and some price it very heavily or require you to purchase an expensive enterprise plan. In some cases, I would recommend actually purchasing that. It can make sense. But in cases where you aren't able to implement a password manager, generate secure passwords in 1Password, don't go to any random site on the internet and generate that secure password. Sometimes you don't know the trustworthiness of these websites, and they're saving your credentials in the background, and require two-factor auth for all these third-party services, especially if they offer it. You just have to do that. It's just kind of a baseline security mechanism for today's times. And don't share credentials and emails or Slack. You can't really delete an email. Slack can be very public. Use 1Password to share tokens and secrets across your organization. Cool. So MDM. So this is a big one, and this is especially important as organizations are shifting over to remote work. So there's a lot of different services for MDM. Some of them are more complex and difficult to set up. I think today Jamf Pro would have been considered like the gold standard for setting up an MDM solution for Mac. Actually, I should probably explain what an MDM solution is. So MDM stands for mobile device management. So your phones, your laptops. And what most organizations do is they install, one of these services like Fleetsmith, Conji, Jamf Pro, or AirWatch on employees' devices to make sure that, the computers are set up securely. And, sometimes on top of just security, organizations want to pre-install applications like, Zoom, for example. So, for, whichever one of these solutions you choose to use, all of them are great. If you're just on all Macs, my recommendation is to use Fleetsmith or Conji. Both are super easy to use, very intuitive. You're not going to have to go through a whole onboarding or guide. It's very straightforward. Just enable some of the recommended settings out here, and you'll be ready to go. If you're using something like Jamf Pro, which has traditionally been considered like the gold standard, Jamf Pro is a little bit harder to work with. You really want like a full-time person dedicated to, configuring your instance. The other thing is a lot more stuff has to be custom scripted, like OS updates or, patches to applications. Fleetsmith and Conji both have a lot of built-in tools to do this just offhand, which can be really nice, especially for smaller IT organizations. And they are at pretty close feature parity with Jamf Pro these days. AirWatch is a little bit harder to use, but they support both Mac and PCs. And a lot of organizations use this. They are owned by VMware. Honestly, a great all-around tool if that's what you're looking for. The recommended settings I think any organization should be enabling is, hard disk encryption. So on Mac, this is like File Vault, Linux, Windows, every platform has some form of hard disk encryption that you can enable. Require OS updates to be installed. Some larger IT organizations, will, have their update servers, rerouted so that they can review all the updates that are being made, especially with larger, IT organizations. This is a common practice. If you're small, just require all OS updates to be installed. It's, good, solid, best practice. Require automatic software updates for the actual applications. Set a screensaver policy, set a password policy that's complex. Require these passwords to be refreshed annually at the very least. And then, pre-install Chrome and 1Password. I think Chrome is, one of the most secure browsers today, especially with the roadmap they have. They alert you about phishing attempts. They alert you if you're going to an HTTP site instead of HTTPS. And, I think they're all around a great tool. I think some people might have some different opinions on that, but I personally believe that Chrome is, still, one of the best, browsers as far as like security and stuff goes. So, you can pre-install Chrome, pre-install 1Password. That way, everyone is, able to use it very easily. You can also install all sorts of other applications that your organization might use and force them to always auto update. So that way, you're on the latest version of Zoom, which is more secure, and so on and so forth. So again, these are some best practices as a base layer that I would set up for your organization. But there's definitely a lot more that you could do to add on top of it. So, the action items here to, get SOC 2 compliant is, select an MDM solution, enroll your organization. Services like Fleetsmith, I believe, are like free for the first 10 seats. So, it's, very simple to set up and get started and start rolling it out and trying it. And then set up, if you're on Mac, set up the DEP program with Apple. So, this is something that we do internally at Secureframe. We have an Apple business account, and anytime, we order through that portal, immediately as soon as the, employee receives their computer, it'll be pre-configured and set up with File Vault 2, password policies, encryption, all that kind of stuff, right from day one. And the employee really doesn't have to do anything. So, would highly recommend setting up the DEP program. It just takes like an hour or so of work to kind of put all this together and then configure the recommended settings. Cool. So version control. So this applies, mostly to like technology organizations. Most companies are already using something like GitHub, GitLab, Bitbucket, or something similar. If you aren't using one of those already, highly recommend doing that. The action items here really enable protected branches for master deployment branches, require reviews for PRs that you merge into production. Of course, you want to make sure there's no malicious code or, no bugs that are obvious. So having a good set of reviews done before any code is pushed into production is very important. And, require a CI system to run your tests and require that they pass before any of these PRs merge into production. Most of these things are things your organization is probably already doing, but it's really not that hard to enforce and enable. There's a lot of great CI tools. At Secureframe, we use Circle CI, AWS, Google Cloud, they all have their equivalents. There's also Travis. So, go ahead and set that up. It's really great, just as far as like best dev practices, but, also for meeting the SOC 2 requirements. Infrastructure. So, there's a ton more than really just what's listed on this page. Today, most organizations are using something like Google Cloud or AWS or Azure. So when you're using these, some of the basic, security practices, and this is stuff you'll see that Amazon and Google Cloud themselves are recommending is, use IAM accounts only and enable two-factor auth. Don't use your root credentials. Those have like a lot of power, and really you should like limit their use. Enable CloudTrail for AWS or Cloud Audit Logs for Google Cloud. Enable it for all regions, archive to an S3 bucket or the Google Cloud equivalent. You really want to make sure that you understand what employees or what people are doing within your Google Cloud or AWS instance. Someone, could be taking down a server and you might want to know who did it, or maybe someone deleted the backup. You really want to see, what changes are being made. And especially when things come down to a data breach or something like that, that's where this stuff becomes really useful. Enable security groups, limit, any open ports that, shouldn't be open, obviously. With S3 and cloud storage, with, most, organizations are using, don't enable public access for any of your buckets, except for, buckets, of course, that you specifically wanted to be public. Enable logging, enable versioning, enable encryption, and, set up daily backups. Daily backups is, what most organizations do, and that's what I would recommend. You could set it up to be weekly, but, daily is, common best practice. Very similar with RDS or Google Cloud SQL, limit access to it inside a VPC group, enable encryption, enable automatic snapshots. And again, daily backups are recommended. Going through this, a lot of SOC 2 is really about process. It's not necessarily about like having strict requirements, because, going back to what I said earlier, SOC 2 is really about an auditor's opinion on, your securities practices. So SOC 2 as a framework is a little bit more flexible. There's like, several security principles that give guidelines on what organizations should be doing to secure themselves. And, over time, auditors have decided, hey, completing employee background checks, going through security awareness training are the common things that, meet this criteria. So, there is some flexibility, but, over time, auditors, have come together and, come up with like a standard set of things that they're looking for out of every SOC 2. So, these are, some of those items, if you, do these 5 things, you've made like a lot of progress on your SOC 2. You're almost like halfway done. The stuff, beyond this is really setting up policies and controls, for your organization. Having your employees complete background checks, having them complete security awareness training, really provisioning all your other services to be compliant, and then, collecting evidence from them automatically. So, I don't like to, I don't like to plug, our company too much, but I think, this is a space that we do excel in. So, Secureframe, we help people get SOC 2 and ISO compliant super easy and quickly. We have an 8-step process that companies do to onboard, and then, we help you monitor and continuously, keep you compliant. So the things that, Secureframe helps with are doing like vendor security reviews. Now, this is something that's really painful, especially for organizations that have a ton of vendors. We try to automatically detect any vendors that we could see that you're using on your site. We perform security reviews. We collect their SOC 2 and fetch any other data that they might have that's pertinent to, their security info, so that, companies like you aren't necessarily, having to do that themselves. We also, make it super easy to create policies, create documents, have your employees go through an onboarding flow, similar to, what you're seeing on the right screenshot. We have them review all the security policies, install an MDM solution, complete a background check and security training all on our platform, which makes it super easy to get all this stuff done. And at the end, we connect you with an auditor who will look at all the evidence that our platform has automatically collected through APIs to make the process just that much easier. But, even if you aren't ready for SOC 2, some of the items we just discussed here, like SSO, password management, all these are great basic security practices to just set your organization up for success for when you are ready. So, I know I talked a little bit fast, but, that was for the most part what I wanted to discuss, and I wanted to just leave it open for Q&A and see if there's any questions we can help out with.
Yeah, thank you so much, Shrav, for that really deep dive. I do have a question from Jim Rispin. He asks, what can an organization expect to spend on a quality pen test from companies like Cobalt or HackerOne? Yeah,
that's a great question. Honestly, it really depends on the scope of your application. If you're trying to do a pen test for all of AWS's services, I can tell you that's just going to cost so much money. I don't even know how to quote that out. But, if your organization is small, you have, less than 50,000 lines of code written, your application is, has a much smaller scope. I think Cobalt and HackerOne, they usually start their pricing out at around $6K. And usually most pen tests will cap out their costs around like 20 to 30K, even for like larger applications. But again, it really depends on your scope. The best thing, honestly, I recommend people do is get quotes from both, and, see who you're happier with.
One of the questions that I've always had about SOC 2 compliance or ISO compliance is that, these are externally driven processes. And what are the kind of events that can really force an organization towards ISO compliance or SOC 2 compliance?
Right. Yeah. So, most of the time when, people come to me, they're like, hey, Shrav, I need a SOC 2. I need it right away. What is a SOC 2? Why is it really expensive? Why does my customer want me to have one? Most of these demands are driven through customers. For the most part, if you're selling to the enterprise or you're a B2B tech company, you pretty much need it from day one, especially if you're storing sensitive data or you're selling to customers that, require all their vendors to have one. Oftentimes, if you're a fintech company, you pretty much need one from day one as well. Vendors like Marqeta, which power like the credit cards for, companies like DoorDash, for their couriers, they require their customers to get like SOC 2s. Really, in the past, SOC 2s were not as common, but these days, I see so many companies just getting one very early on before they're even, 3 or 4 employees. By the time most organizations are at 100 employees, they either have one or they're thinking about getting one these days, is what I would say.
Yeah. And, one of the interesting things as part of all of that is that due to the length of time, and, I've talked to some organizations who've been through this or through high trust or anything, all of those, major certifications rather, is that you really need to have been around for a while. How do you do a SOC 2 compliance when you're a brand new organization?
Yeah, I mean, it's actually much easier to get compliant early on and set up like a good foundation. Rolling out a whole MDM solution, SSO, password management to a much larger organization is like a challenge. It takes a lot of time, and in SOC 2, a lot of the stuff that you end up doing is like cat herding. And that's really what one of the problems we aim to solve with Secureframe is we do a lot of the cat herding for you. We send emails until your employees install the MDM solution or read the policies or complete their background check to make it just that much easier. But with SOC 2, most organizations, I would say, spend an average of 6 to 8 months to prep for it and get their SOC 2 Type 1. And then, your SOC 2 Type 2 has an audit period of at least 6 months. So now, you're at 12 to 14 months to get your SOC 2 on average. I've seen companies take 1.5 years to do it. Now, you can get it done in a week. If you asked me to come into your organization and say, Shrav, we need SOC 2 next week or SOC 2 Type 1 next week, I'd say let's go ahead, let's get prepped for it. And then, we could do that very quickly for a small organization, easily in under a week, sometimes, a lot quicker. The question really is at that point, how long is the auditor going to take to write the report? Because there is time that goes into it, and, auditors tend to be very busy and have a lot of demand. So that's really where some of the slowdown might be to actually produce the report.
Mm-hmm. So do we have other questions out there from the audience at this point? Give folks a nice 20 seconds or so to finish typing if they are.
Cool. Yeah, and I'll also be available on the Slack group, and anyone can email me at shrav@secureframe.com. If you have questions that are specific to your organization, we're always happy to help. And we could provide a more detailed guide in the Slack channel of kind of what we just went through.
Sure.
Yeah.
That's awesome. And we did have a question. In total, what should a company budget for SOC 2 if they're just getting started?
Yeah, again, this is one of those questions that really depends on the scope of your application and the size of your organization. On average, I would say the average SOC 2 audit, from what I've seen, is probably anywhere from 25 to 50K. It really depends on the size of your organization. And then, when you're one of the things I dislike the most about SOC 2 is just it's shrouded in a lot of secrecy. All these salespeople, come to you and they're like, hey, I'm going to sell you some SOC 2 services, and they don't really tell you what it is. So oftentimes, I'll talk to someone who's talked to 3 or 4 vendors, and they still, don't understand what exactly they have to do for SOC 2 and what some of these checklist items or to-do list items are. And, we try to help people and just be as transparent as possible around that. Even going through this, some of the hidden costs that people don't discuss are hey, if you're rolling out an MDM solution, that's going to cost money. A password manager, that's going to cost money. It's free right now for 1Password for 6 months, but after that, it's going to cost money. And if you have 50 people, I think you're paying $5, $6 a user for that. Maybe you can negotiate those rates, but all these other tools that people are using to get secure cost money. And those are the hidden costs that people don't talk about. I would say, for most organizations, the pen test is probably going to be the most expensive piece, that you'll have to deal with, especially for a small organization. It's really hard to see, the cost of a pen test being less than $6K from a reputable provider these days. So, aside from your actual audit costs and tooling, that'll probably be your biggest cost. So I know that wasn't a very direct answer, but I hope I can explain why it's not a very direct answer.
Well, I feel like that's the whole deal, is that it's so dependent. Everybody's site, like anything else, every organization is unique, and every SOC 2 audit is going to be at least a little bit unique, dependent on your own code, depending upon external factors and things along those lines.
Yeah. And actually, one thing to note is, with the SOC 2 Type 1 and a Type 2, each of those individually can cost 25 to 50K. Now, most people will get a SOC 2 Type 1 and then they'll go to a SOC 2 Type 2. And, that's what most organizations do. Now, you can go directly to a SOC 2 Type 2. It's not common, but then you don't have the cost of producing that Type 1 report. And, the Type 1 report and the Type 2 report are very similar. The Type 2 one is longer because it assesses the quality of the controls and stuff that you've made, and it's a slightly longer and more comprehensive report. So the SOC 2 Type 2 report can cost more, but you can skip the SOC 2 Type 1 entirely. I don't necessarily recommend it for every organization, but that is one cost-saving measure. The other one is, SOC 2 and ISO, getting your SOC 2 and ISO 27001 audit done in one. So ISO 27001 is like super similar to SOC 2. SOC 2 is more common in the US, and ISO is more common internationally. It's like a European-based framework, and that's why you see it more commonly outside the US. So they really do assess almost all the same things. There's a couple differences here and there that aren't hard to adapt, but if you go with an auditor like a Coalfire or a Line, you can get those audits done together, and it'll be much cheaper if you know that you're going to need an ISO.
Cool. Well, again, Shrav, thank you so much for sharing your expertise. This is a huge amount of data to soak in for everybody. But I'm really thrilled that we had the opportunity to talk today, and then we had great opportunity to answer questions. So I think we're going to wrap it up for the morning. We're going to fire up our lobby chat here in just a couple of moments. If you're looking for the link for that, that will be over in the welcome channel in Futureproof IT. We'll be happy to set that up and run for 45 minutes, an hour. And otherwise than that, we'll see you all tomorrow. Let me go ahead and share the, actually, I take that back. So we do have, a couple of slides here. 1 second. Click and share. Awesome. So we have tomorrow for the last day of final sessions. We're up to, I believe it's, of course, this is what happens when I move the book, $5,303 for Heart to Heart International, which is just completely awesome. So we're going to be starting our happy hour. Thanks, of course, to our awesome sponsors, Simple Thread, The Grove Technologies, PC Medics, the new IT, and of course, I'm blanking. I feel so terrible. An Autonomy Co-op. So thanks so much to all of the people who really made this event possible. And we'll see you in just a moment. So thank you.